Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Fireside Chat at UUMC. We are all about the chat tonight and not so much about the fire or the fireside. So we have changed the format up a little bit for the summer for these chats. And we've been interviewing some members of our congregation and asking them questions about things that are pertinent to their lives, but that are also pertinent to things that we're thinking about. So we had an interview with Tom Cabin, who's a doctor, about the coronavirus. We had an interview recently with one of our youth about what's it like to be a youth in quarantine and still in school. And so I am so delighted to have Ashley Prevost with me this evening. And Ashley is the Assistant Director of Instructional Leadership at TEA, the Texas Education Agency, which has been in the news a lot lately, Ashley. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of conflicting guidance from the TEA. So many of folks that work in education might not be super excited to hear from the TEA, but I promise that we're all wanting the best for teachers and students just like they are.
Right. And so Ashley is coming to us not as an official spokesperson of the TEA. She's coming as a church member. Ashley's been going to UUMC since 2006. So what were you doing in your previous life before you worked with TEA, Ashley?
Well, I got into education straight out of college. I worked for a couple years as a public school teacher in New Orleans, and then came back to Austin and worked for another 4 years as a classroom teacher, and then an additional 4 years as an administrator at a middle school. And now I'm at the TEA.
Super. And just as a side note, Ashley and Chad, her husband, have two wonderful kids. And Chad is our communications director at UUMC, Chad Jones. So, well, one thing I thought I would kick off with is your thoughts about, so AISD is having a big meeting tonight, and I imagine there's lots of school districts having these kinds of meetings. Tell me a little bit about what's going on there. Maybe what do you expect might happen?
I think that just like many districts across the state, AISD is trying to balance the needs of its variety of stakeholders, teachers, parents, students, and trying to navigate how to safely open their schools this year while adhering to both the CDC health and safety guidelines, as well as meet the requirements that the TEA and a variety of other state authorities, the Attorney General, the Governor, have set out in order for them to receive their funding. So I think they're probably looking for ways to be able to do both and satisfy as many, needs of their stakeholders as they can.
Okay, and I think they're hoping to push back the opening date of school, and then also they'll be starting online. Is that right, in AISD?
Mm-hmm. Yep. The latest that I heard is that they'll be online at least until September 8th, with the opportunity at that point to evaluate sort of what the community spread of the virus is at that point to determine whether or not they're able to continue to be virtual for additional 4 weeks beyond that point, or if there will be an option for them to open in person and continue to offer online options for parents.
I guess in fairness to all of those different stakeholders and authorities that are trying to make all these decisions, I mean, back in June, the coronavirus, we were in a completely different state. I mean, I think that many of us thought that we were getting to a point where we'd be able to open up more things. We might even be able to have small group meetings at the church. And I mean, that's really changed. And I'm sure that completely turns all plans upside down.
Yes, definitely. I know that a lot of the work that we were doing internally at the TEA that potentially wasn't made public suggested that when schools opened, it would be a local decision, that there would be options for in-person, hybrid, or virtual. And then, unfortunately, because this has been politicized and we're not able to adhere exclusively to the recommendations of experts and scientists, there has been a push that schools need to open in person. I think that there's also concern that the pandemic and virtual instruction has exacerbated and compounded some of the inequity we see in our public school systems.
Just
Um,
about that, about the, yeah, because
yeah,
that's certainly true in the larger society that we see these inequalities. They're just blown up. Talk about that in the schools. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously our public schools serve a wide variety of students from a wide variety of backgrounds. And preliminary data from the virtual instruction in the spring suggests that while remote instruction didn't necessarily negatively impact the progress and achievement of students who come from families that have a greater degree of resources, it was really difficult for families that maybe don't have access to one-to-one devices for their students, who maybe don't have somebody that's able to stay home with their student to ensure that, you know, their questions get answered. So we really did see the virtual learning negatively impact those students in our public schools who are already most at risk. Um, so I've seen a lot of, sort of public discourse that is saying, that the push to open schools is exclusively selfish and isn't considering the health and the safety of the workforce, which I think is a completely valid concern. My sister is a teacher. I was a teacher and worked in schools for a long time, so a lot of my close friends are teachers or administrators, and I know that's a very real concern. And I also um, have relationships with folks that are very concerned about the impact that this will have on those most vulnerable that rely on our school systems for um, to meet their nutrition needs, to have to be to receive the type of services that they have individualized education plans or 504 plans to meet special learning needs, that even if a parent or a caretaker is able to be home to help them navigate their virtual instruction, they don't have the specialized skill that some students need to just help them thrive. So I think that this is a situation where I can definitely see and empathize with folks who feel very strongly on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. So the beginning of the school year is always kind of an anxious time anyway for kids. And I remember, like you, I was a school teacher years ago, and I remember a lot of anxiety about what are the kids going to be like this year, and what kind of troublemakers am I going to have to deal with, or whatever. So
Right.
there's already a lot of anxiety, and now you're bringing all of this other stuff into it about, the coronavirus, and then what's the quality of the kids' education, and then what happens if somebody in my classroom tests positive. What do we do in that case, and then what happens to teaching at that point? So, how do you think parents and educators are dealing with all this anxiety?
Yeah. I think it's a very it's a very real anxiety for families and for teachers. I know that a lot of what I've seen from, you know, teaching forums that I'm still a part of, or from, the educators that I'm still close to, have shared across various social media platforms, is that largely teachers are doing what they always do, which is step up to the challenge that's being placed before them, innovating in ways that they potentially have not had to in the past. I especially have seen, friends that I have that teach early childhood, where actually seeing the way your mouth moves when it makes certain sounds is incredibly important for teaching phonics, particularly to students that are still learning English as a second language, that they're innovating by learning different platforms online where they can record images of themselves saying sounds, so students can see the shape of their mouths. People working to create masks that have plastic windows so their students can still see them smile. So I know teachers are really innovating. Um, and I think that parents are doing the same thing. There's been a lot of sort of heated discourse, in various public spheres about parents that are choosing to set up sort of collaboratives with other parents. Yeah, pods that with other families that have students that are close to the same ages, and pooling their resources to, be able to hire someone to support their kids with their learning so that, parents can continue to work, or hiring someone that has those specialized skills that their students need, which has been contentious in that it is also an example of sort of the exacerbation of inequity in our public school systems, where families that have resources are able to take steps to ensure that their students are not negatively impacted, that not all families will have access to. So I think that has been sort of the contentious point there. And I know that, for me as a parent, something that I'm trying to keep in mind is that anyone that works in education is facing an unprecedented task. And so my role will be to operate with more than usual grace, sort of try to operate with the understanding that I've never met an educator that got into education because they wanted to, exercise some punitive power over your student, or because they,
job.
yeah, exactly. That I've never met an educator that got into education for anything other than altruistic reasons.
It's a
And
calling, I think, like the
yeah,
ministry. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that at over even the decade plus a few years that I've been working in education, the job has more and more demands placed on the shoulders of both classroom teachers and administrators in our public schools. The job is getting harder and harder and harder each year. And so I try to just remember that the one thing I can do as a parent, in addition to offer my support and resources in any way that my daughter's school asks of me, is just to extend grace and gratitude, knowing that teachers are often doing the very best they can to, you know, do their jobs well in what feels like an impossible situation.
Great. So maybe instead of bringing the proverbial apple to place on the teacher's desk, maybe just a reminder that of grace, and of offering that grace. I like that. I think that's a beautiful idea. Yeah. I was just going to ask you a question too about masks, and I don't know. I'm assuming that masks are not mandatory at school, or at least maybe they are for certain ages. But how's that going to play out in school life, do you think, if there's in-person classes?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tremendous challenge. We did receive notification from my daughter's school that they have a pre-K on campus at the school that she attends. And so they said all students age 3 and up will be required to wear masks the entire time they're in the building. I mentioned earlier that my sister is a teacher, and she said she lives in Argyle, where the situation is not quite as bleak as it is here in Austin. And they voted to open schools in person on August 17th. And I said, is that like, are you nervous? How are you feeling about that? And she said, I'm a little bit nervous, but mostly just about enforcing all the protocols. I think on a good day, teachers do their best to, use all their best strategies for classroom management. But I think it's going to be a tremendous challenge. Not only just students are going to be so excited to be on campus, they're, going to forget, or students are going to be upset. And I don't know if you knew this, but 6 and 7-year-olds are not the best emotional regulators.
Right.
So you have the challenge of students who are, not in compliance just because they're absent-minded. And then you have students that are going to get frustrated about something, and then knowing that it's something important that an adult has asked them to do, they're going to not wear their mask in defiance. And so I think most educators that I know have expressed the most anxiety about being able to enforce all of the health and safety protocols that campuses are being asked to implement. As part of my role at the TEA, I sat in on several webinars, group meetings with experts early in the spring. And a lot of them said, we're potentially looking at 18 to 24 months, 3 months ago.
Mhm.
and talking about how it was an interesting challenge because many of the best practices that are recommended in terms of health and safety protocols by the CDC are rendered virtually impossible by the realities of school operations. So they were talking about, having to think through, how does busing work when, there's not typically a monitor on the bus to ensure students are staying 6 feet away from each other and keeping their masks on. The lunchroom is exponentially more dangerous now because more of the particles, or there's more virus particles aspirated when eating. It's similar to singing
So yeah.
and just talking. And so now they're like, okay, well, what if we move lunches to the classrooms? Well, now there's a secondary risk of students with food allergies, or any number of things. And so they were just talking about how it is going to be a tremendous challenge, and campuses really are going to have their work cut out for them if in fact they choose to, or if they're required to resume in-person classes.
Yeah. Uh, well, that's amazing that that people are considering all of those possibilities. I mean, and of course, there's also the unexpected things that'll just happen, and it'll be like, gosh, I never thought that would happen, but here we are.
But here we are, exactly. And I think that something you mentioned earlier was, what are the different protocols going to be in some of the states where classes are starting earlier than we do here in Texas? We've seen preliminary reports saying, 260 teachers quarantined because they came to their back to school PD and somebody was exposed. And I think it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out. And I hope that moving forward, there can be some better collaboration among all the different entities at the state level, TEA included, before additional guidance is put out. I think that was one of the big challenges for campuses, district and campus leaders in the last couple of weeks, is that they believed one thing was going to be true and put plans in place, that abided by those guidelines. And then different guidance was put out, and then 2 weeks later that guidance was edited, and then 2 weeks later that guidance was qualified. And so I think folks that work in districts and on campuses are justifiably upset and frustrated. So I'm hopeful that moving forward folks can do a better job of getting on the same page.
No kidding. Well, we're getting to the close to the end of our time, so I wanted to ask you one more thing, and that is, often it seems like something good will arise out of a crisis. Not that we want a crisis like this to happen, so that we learn things. But do you see anything good or positive that's come out of this crisis so far, just in relation to schools and teachers and students?
Yeah, I think one thing is an increase in appreciation and gratitude for teachers,
Yeah.
particularly when we first, initiated stay at home. I feel like I saw a lot of, some memes trying to be funny, saying, oh my gosh, teachers shouldn't be paid what they're paid. They should be paid triple what they're paid. Like, I can't even keep up with my 3 children, let alone a class of 30. So I think anytime that folks can develop a greater appreciation for the hard work of somebody else, particularly teachers, that's a good thing. I think another positive impact is that a lot of teachers were sort of forced to innovate, and some of that innovation is maybe they didn't want to, but a lot of teachers now know how to navigate a variety of online platforms, have figured out ways to get their job done and get instruction to their students in ways that they never thought possible or they thought would be necessary before. So I think that, what's the adage? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think we're seeing a little bit of that. But yeah, I think there have been some good things. I don't know that I would say that there's anything that, made it like, oh, well, this has been worth it. I don't know that I would say that.
Right.
Definitely some,
Yeah.
definitely some silver linings there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true of the church too. I know just in some conversations, I mean, we have this online presence now, and worship and all that. Like we're doing this fireside chat and all these things that really weren't things that we were doing before. And of course, I guess the good and the bad about it is that we're going to have to continue on with
Yeah,
some of the things, right? Yeah,
exactly. I think some of the things we saw in education is like several districts scramble to get their students one-to-one devices. Also, several districts work to figure out how to get broadband internet to all of their students, whether that's via hotspots or other things. And we know that when access to those sorts of things is more equitable, then everyone benefits. I think those are two small things, but yeah.
yeah, those are great. Those are great things. So, well, I guess we've come to the close of our time. I've really enjoyed talking with you, Ashley. I
Yeah.
appreciate the prep work, appreciate the work that you're doing at the TEA, and struggling and trying to balance all of those interests and things. Do you have any final or any closing word that you want to share? Or?
Only that it's in addition to all of the things happening with reopening schools during a pandemic and the back and forth about virtual versus in person versus a hybrid model. There's just a lot happening in AISD this year specifically. We just hired a new superintendent, or I'm not quite sure if she started or if they've just named a lone finalist, but Stephanie Elizalde from Dallas ISD is going to be our new superintendent in AISD. There are elections for the board, so 4 of the board seats. The incumbents have indicated that they don't plan on running. So the combination of the new superintendent and the incoming board will set the direction for AISD for the next 5 years, for the 2020 to 2025 strategic plan, as well as be in charge of developing our equity plan. So I know that's something that's been a really hot topic in AISD over the past several years, and that a lot of folks at UUMC have a deep interest in increasing equity in our public schools. So if those are things that folks at UUMC are interested in, I think those are just some things to keep an eye on in public ed this year.
Great, yeah, good points. Especially this evening too, with the school board meeting tonight. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. So.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, well, thank you again. Thank you to all of the friends out there and members of UUMC, visitors, friends, family. We're so grateful that you've been with us this evening. And I'm just going to leave you with the words that Ashley left us with, and that is offer grace. Wherever you are, whether you're in school or out of school, whether you've just gone way beyond school, offer grace to each other in this difficult time. We all need it, and we certainly can get by and get through our days a lot more easily with that extra grace and compassion. So thanks again, Ashley. And we'll see all of you next time in the Fireside Chat. Bye-bye.
Hey, John.